In the early 1990s, Sweden didn't really have a big video game industry yet. There were no major studios, no powerhouse publishers, just small groups of hobbyists experimenting with code in their spare time. But across the country, something special was happening on the Amiga, a home computer that inspired a generation of creators to see how far they could push the limited hardware. It was a subculture called the demo scene, a creative underground where programmers, artists, and musicians tried to outdo each other by making the Amiga perform technical miracles. It wasn't about money or fame, it was about creativity, competition, and bragging rights, pushing the hardware further than anyone else and making sure everyone knew it. In the small town of Avesta in southern Sweden, a handful of those demo scene creators were starting to dream bigger. Two of them, Fredrik Liljegren and Andreas Axelsson, were core members of the Swedish Amiga demo group, The Silence, one of Europe's most respected creative collectives. According to co-founder Andreas Axelsson, the first spark for what became DICE came in 1989 during a weekend in a summer cottage in Blekinge. There, a few members of The Silence, including Fredrik Liljegren, Ulf Mandorf, and Andreas Axelsson, decided it was time to try making real games, not just demos. They even had concept art from a Danish artist, Mikael Bau, who'd drawn pinball tables that would become the basis for their first hit, which we'll come back to shortly. They weren't working alone for long. They soon teamed up with Olof Gustafsson, who helped shape the distinctive electronic music style of their early games, and Marcus Nyström, the artist whose clean, colorful graphics gave their games a distinctive look. All were active in The Silence, or the active demo scene, sharing the same obsession with squeezing impossible performance from the Amiga. At the time, Axelsson handled most of the coding. Gustafsson crafted the sound, Nyström drew the visuals, Mandorf refined the physics, and Liljegren, studying computer science at Växjö University, took on design and business duties. Everyone wore multiple hats, and none of them imagined their late-night hobby would soon become a career. Axelsson later recalled that Ulf Mandorf, the oldest in the group and gifted at maths, built the first working pinball physics prototype, a simple white bowl with a flipper and a ball that convinced them the project would work. Without that simulation, the project might never have taken shape. By 1992, the informal Alvesta crew had grown into a real company based in nearby Växjö. They registered Digital Illusions HB there, the HB standing for Handelsbolag, a Swedish trading partnership, marking their transition from hobbyists to professionals. The company was officially founded by 4 members: Fredrik Liljegren, Andreas Axelsson, Olof Gustafsson, and Marcus Nyström. Although Ulf Mandorf was not listed on the formal company paperwork, his work was so central to DICE's early success that some later articles have even named him among the founders, a reflection of just how integral he was to the studio's beginnings. Mandorf remained a key team member during these early projects, helping the group transition from demo coders to professional developers. Their first commercial release, Pinball Dreams, recreated the feel of a real pinball table with smooth scrolling, fast physics, and bright Amiga graphics. Technical wizardry for the time. Reviews praised its polish, and the game spread quickly across Europe. Before long, the small team behind the project had an international hit on their hands. Development stretched from a 1989 concept to a 1992 release through 21st Century Entertainment, the British publisher led by Andrew Hewson. Mandorf stayed on through their second game, Pinball Fantasies, released in 1993, before moving on as the company began to grow. That sequel built on everything the team had learned, with sharper visuals, new tables, and improved physics. It became an even bigger success than the original, further establishing Digital Illusions as rising stars in the European games industry. After that came Benefactor, a puzzle platformer that combined technical polish with playful design, showing that the team could do more than pinball. Developed from their Växjö base, it reinforced their reputation for craftsmanship and creativity. A third pinball title, Pinball Illusions, followed in 1995, introducing multi-ball play and more advanced physics. By then, DICE's trilogy of pinball games, Pinball Dreams, Pinball Fantasies, and Pinball Illusions had become a benchmark for digital pinball and a defining part of the studio's identity. By this point, the team had relocated to a shared house in Växjö to focus more fully on game development. Other collaborators, Bo Staffan Lankinen, Thomas Anderson, Patrick Bergdahl, and Joachim Wejdemar, joined under the Digital Illusions umbrella, contributing to projects like Hardcore and Benefactor. These were developed from the same Växjö base before the group relocated to Gothenburg. By the end of 1993, the team had left Växjö behind and moved to Gothenburg, a bigger city with better access to talent and publishers. The move marked the end of the small-town era and the beginning of DICE's transformation into a professional studio. The contributions of early team members like Ulf Mandorf remained a defining part of DICE's identity. By 1994, Digital Illusions had become one of Sweden's first studios with true international recognition. They were still small, still learning, but part of something bigger, a spark that would soon ignite a creative revolution. In the wider industry, everything was starting to shift technologically. 3D graphics were about to take over. New consoles like the PlayStation were redefining what games could look and feel like. Inside that little office in Gothenburg, the founders could sense it, that mix of excitement and uncertainty that comes right before everything changes. They didn't know it yet, but their next leap would turn them from ambitious Amiga coders into pioneers of a new era of video games. The PlayStation and the PC were the future, and they wanted in. So the team started over. They reformed as Digital Illusions CE, short for Creative Entertainment, better known today as DICE. At this point, the studio left the Amiga behind entirely, turning its attention toward next-generation consoles like the PlayStation and Sega Saturn, and beginning to work with publishers beyond Sweden. At first, things were messy. Strange prototypes, constant crashes, experiments that went nowhere. One developer would later recall, everything we learned before suddenly felt useless. We had to reinvent ourselves from scratch. Their first real success in 3D came with Motorhead in 1998, a futuristic racing game that proved DICE could compete with the best 3D studios in Europe. It was fast, smooth, and technically impressive, built with support from publisher Gremlin Interactive after DICE secured funding through Bonnier Multimedia, which had invested in the studio in 1996 to expand its 3D development. It's been said that the team poured everything they had into Motorhead. Long nights, unstable builds, and a lot of learning on the job. According to one artist, we were figuring out 3D as we went. Every day felt like both progress and panic. The engine built for Motorhead was DICE's first internal 3D framework, a foundation that would evolve into the company's later proprietary tools, leading eventually to Frostbite. Behind the scenes, the company was growing up fast. DICE wasn't just a handful of friends anymore. It was a real business, with deadlines and publishers expecting results. Some veterans missed the small studio freedom, while newer hires brought in a more professional rhythm. People inside DICE would later describe that period as a balancing act, half creative chaos, half corporate catch-up. During this time, Patrick Söderlund joined the company, helping manage the expanding teams and bringing much-needed structure. He had previously led the Stockholm-based Refraction Games team that DICE would soon merge with, and initially worked to bridge the studio's technical and creative sides, laying the groundwork for larger-scale productions. All that experimentation led to a partnership with Refraction Games. Refraction had been developing an ambitious title called Codename Eagle, an alternate history action game set in 1917, where players could drive vehicles, pilot planes, and fight on foot across open maps. The game was published by Take-Two Interactive in 1999, but DICE was heavily involved in support and collaboration with the Refraction team during its development. While rough around the edges, it contained the core ideas that would later define Battlefield. Those late nights testing Codename Eagle became legendary, developers crashing on couches, while servers overheated and networks failed. They didn't realize it yet, but they were already shaping one of gaming's most influential formulas. By the end of the decade, DICE had completed its transformation. They had grown into one of Europe's leading 3D studios, confident in both engineering and design. They had learned how to survive the leap from Amiga to PlayStation and PC, how to build game engines from scratch, and how to work within publisher demands without losing their creative drive. They had reinvented themselves, and the next leap was waiting just ahead. When DICE formally merged with Refraction in 2000, they not only gained new staff and technology, but also inherited the engine that powered Codename Eagle. The merger roughly doubled DICE's headcount and created two main studios, Gothenburg and Stockholm, with Refraction's Patrick Söderlund taking on a leadership role that bridged production and creative direction. The Refraction merger also marked a turning point for the original founders. Fredrik Liljegren, who had helped shape DICE's early business and production, decided to move on in 2000. As the company grew and merged with Refraction, he chose to start fresh, co-founding Massive Entertainment in Malmö, a studio that would go on to create Ground Control and later the division under Ubisoft. The remaining founders, Andreas Axelsson, Marcus Nyström, and Olof Gustafsson, stayed to lead DICE through its next evolution, guiding the technical, artistic, and musical direction of the new Battlefield era. That technology became the Refractor engine, refined and expanded by both DICE and former Refraction programmers. Among its core architects were Johan Persson and Torbjörn Röjen, who worked closely with Andreas Axelsson and the DICE tech team to adapt it for large-scale multiplayer maps. It became the backbone for a new project, one that would redefine multiplayer shooters forever. The concept had a name, Battlefield 1942. It was an audacious idea, a World War II shooter where players could fight on land, sea, and air across huge dynamic maps. The game's design emphasized teamwork, vehicles, and open-ended objectives, a stark contrast to the scripted single-player shooters of its time. The Refractor engine's network code allowed dozens of players to interact simultaneously, something few other games had achieved, while DICE's art and design teams focused on balancing the chaos to make it feel cinematic but unpredictable. Developers would later describe it, in paraphrase, as not about inventing a new genre, but about making something that felt like a real war, not a movie. Every soldier, tank, and aircraft played a role in the larger chaos. When Battlefield 1942 launched in September 2002, it was an instant hit. Servers filled overnight, reviews called it groundbreaking, and DICE went from a respected European studio to a global name. They had created something new, a large-scale, team-based shooter. Battlefield 1942 was powered by the Refractor engine, a technology originally built by the Refraction team and then re-engineered by DICE. Its blend of physics, networking, and vehicle systems set a new standard for multiplayer design. It also became the foundation for the company's long-term technology strategy, evolving into the later Refractor 2 engine that powered Battlefield Vietnam and Battlefield 2. For DICE, success came with pressure. It was their first blockbuster, and it brought attention from major publishers, most notably Electronic Arts, who had published the game worldwide through EA Games. EA quickly began discussions for a deeper relationship, seeing Battlefield as the foundation of a long-term franchise. Within months of the game's success, EA invested in DICE, acquiring a minority stake that would later pave the way for a full buyout. Inside the studio, reactions were mixed. Some saw EA's involvement as a chance to scale up, while others worried about creative independence. But one thing was undeniable. The same developers who had once coded pinball physics on Amigas had just reinvented online multiplayer. The merger with Refraction had also shifted DICE's center of gravity. With a growing presence in Stockholm and new projects already in motion, the company was expanding beyond its Gothenburg roots. By the end of 2002, DICE had offices in both cities, larger teams, and a new sense of identity. No longer just a small Swedish studio, but a global player. DICE had stepped onto the world stage, and soon, new challengers would arrive to test everything they had built. In 2003, publisher Electronic Arts wanted to move fast. They had seen what Battlefield 1942 could do and wanted more: expansions, sequels, and new content. For DICE, that meant rapid growth and the first real test of scaling success. Teams split up. Some built the Road to Rome and Secret Weapons of World War II expansions, while others began prototyping new ideas. It has been said the studio's mood shifted almost overnight, from playful invention to full-scale production. That same year, DICE opened a small satellite office in London, Ontario, known as DICE Canada, to help with multiplayer maps and expansion support. DICE Canada, led by Frederick Lundberg and Roman Ormandy, contributed to content for Battlefield 1942 and Battlefield Vietnam before closing in 2006. But expansion came with headaches. Suddenly, DICE was no longer a small Swedish outfit. It was a multinational developer learning to balance creativity, schedules, and corporate structure. While DICE was growing, a new competitor was already making waves. In late 2003, Infinity Ward released the first Call of Duty, a tightly scripted, cinematic take on World War II. Where Battlefield thrived on chaos and freedom, Call of Duty focused on intensity and storytelling. At first, the two series did not collide directly, but the contrast was clear and the competition was coming. In 2004, DICE released Battlefield Vietnam, a louder, flashier follow-up set in the Vietnam War. It introduced helicopters, rock and roll soundtracks, and asymmetrical warfare, a deliberate contrast to the disciplined tone of 1942. The game sold well, but reactions were mixed. Some players loved its energy, others missed the clarity of the original. Technically, it ran on an upgraded version of the original Refractor engine, bridging the gap before the studio's next generation of tech was ready. Back in Sweden, the teams at DICE were preparing their next leap, moving decisively from historical settings into modern conflict. That massive project became Battlefield 2, released in 2005. It was powered by Refractor 2, a brand new iteration of DICE's in-house engine. This technological upgrade provided the essential foundation for true modern warfare. It delivered sharper visuals, supported larger sprawling environments, and ensured more reliable networking than ever before. This was the raw muscle needed for the coming global war. But the biggest transformation was not technical. It was systemic. Battlefield 2 introduced a multiplayer blueprint that would define the next decade of gaming, built around three core pillars: online stat tracking, persistent ranks, and most crucially, squad play. This was made possible by the innovative squad and commander system. This created a critical, hierarchical chain of command, replacing chaotic gun battles with coordinated military operations. Players formed small squads with an assigned squad leader. And here was the game changer. You could spawn directly on your squad leader, allowing a team to instantly reinforce a collapsing front or execute a rapid, unexpected flanking maneuver. Above them sat the commander. This player viewed the battle from an overhead map, giving high-level strategic orders and wielding decisive power with abilities like UAV reconnaissance to expose enemy positions, or a devastating artillery strike to crack hardened defenses. When these systems clicked, Battlefield 2 was magnificent. It was ambitious, modern, and fast. And it transformed Battlefield from a beloved cult favorite into a global blockbuster. Technically and commercially, it was a triumph. Around the same time, DICE also developed Battlefield 2 Modern Combat, a console adaptation built specifically for the PlayStation 2 and Xbox. It featured a dedicated single-player campaign and marked the franchise's first truly successful step into the console market. Inside DICE, the culture was shifting. It has been said the creative chaos that once defined the studio was starting to feel more like controlled fire. One veteran remembered that decisions now came a little less from passion, a little more from planning. Still, the team's blend of engineering precision and design ambition kept shining through. By 2006, DICE took another risk with Battlefield 2142, a futuristic spin built on the Battlefield 2 engine. The same Refractor 2 technology was pushed further, proving DICE could still experiment even under corporate pressure. Its near-future setting and towering mechs divided fans at first, but showed that DICE was not afraid to break its own formula. That same year, EA made it official. They acquired DICE outright, turning the Swedish studio into a full member of the EA family. The acquisition, completed in October 2006, brought EA's ownership from a majority stake to full control. By this time, several of DICE's founding figures had departed. Andreas Axelsson left shortly after the acquisition, closing out nearly 17 years with the studio, while Olof Gustafsson departed around the same period to continue his audio career at Net Entertainment in Gothenburg. Marcus Nystrom remained at DICE, carrying the studio's visual direction forward. As one developer later put it, "We had gone from inventors to caretakers." But even within a corporate giant, DICE's creative spark had not gone out, and the next few years would prove just how far that spark could still reach. By 2007, DICE had entered a new phase, fully owned by Electronic Arts, yet determined to prove it could still innovate. The studio was now based primarily in Stockholm, with a smaller presence in Canada. Frostbite, the in-house technology that would define the studio for years to come, began development around 2006 under lead engineer Johan Andersson. Conceived as a next-generation evolution of the Refractor engine, Frostbite was designed for destructible environments, realistic physics, and cinematic sound. It quickly became DICE's new identity. The first game to showcase this technology was Battlefield Bad Company, released in 2008. Built entirely on the Frostbite engine, it introduced a single-player campaign full of humor, personality, and fully voiced characters, a deliberate break from the serious tone of earlier Battlefield titles. The story followed a squad of misfits chasing gold through fictional war zones, blending satire with explosive gameplay. Players loved its destruction system, the banter, and its adventurous tone. It was also the first Battlefield designed for consoles first, marking a major strategic shift for DICE. While the Bad Company team was perfecting destruction and chaos, another group inside DICE was working on something completely different, a first-person game about freedom, motion, and purity of design. That project became Mirror's Edge, released in November 2008. Led by lead designer Thomas Andersson and art director Johannes Söderqvist, it focused on movement and parkour across white rooftops, minimal violence, and clean, minimalist architecture. Composer Solar Fields, also known as Magnus Bergerson, created an ambient, meditative score that further distinguished it from anything else at the time. Although sales were modest, critics praised its originality, and it went on to gain a devoted cult following. In between, DICE released Battlefield 1943, a smaller, download-only title built on the Frostbite 1.5 engine. Set in the Pacific theater of World War II, it reimagined Battlefield 1942 for consoles and proved Frostbite could scale beautifully across platforms. Following Battlefield 1943, DICE took a creative detour with Battlefield Heroes, released in June 2009. Developed first by DICE and later supported by Easy Studios, it was a free-to-play, third-person spin-off built around humor and accessibility rather than realism. The game featured cartoon-styled soldiers, exaggerated physics, and simplified mechanics, pitting the Royal Army against the National Army in light-hearted online battles. Players could jump into short matches through a web-based launcher and earn or purchase customization items through one of EA's first major microtransaction systems, years before free-to-play became common in mainstream shooters. Though some traditional fans dismissed it as too playful, Battlefield Heroes attracted millions of players worldwide and helped pioneer EA's early play-for-free model. Around the same period, DICE also collaborated with Korean developer NeoWiz on Battlefield Online, a free-to-play adaptation of Battlefield 2 built for the Asian market using the Refractor 2 engine. It featured updated visuals, new maps, and modernized systems tailored for online play. Though released only in South Korea, Battlefield Online reflected DICE's growing global reach and its experiments with new business models ahead of the next generation of Battlefield titles. That same year came Battlefield Bad Company 2, expanding on everything the first game did right, Bigger maps, tighter gunplay, and a stronger multiplayer mode brought DICE back to the top of the FPS world. It became one of the highest rated shooters of its year and solidified Frostbite 1.5 as the technical foundation for DICE's future, paving the way for Frostbite 2, which would power their next generation of games. Inside DICE, these parallel projects, Bad Company, Mirror's Edge, and 1943, captured the studio's dual identity, technical precision, and creative risk-taking. Developers recalled long nights pushing Frostbite to its limits, but also a sense of pride that they were making something distinctly theirs. It was a time of rediscovery and exhaustion. As DICE's reputation grew, so did Electronic Arts' expectations. The company began positioning Frostbite as a shared technology across other EA studios, including BioWare, Criterion, and EA Sports. This elevated DICE's internal status, but also stretched its resources thin, as the team was now responsible for supporting multiple projects across the EA ecosystem, a challenge that would prove both a blessing and a burden. By 2010, DICE had proven that even under corporate ownership, it could still surprise players. The studio closed the decade with confidence, having reinvented its image not just as the maker of Battlefield, but as one of the most creative and technically advanced developers in the industry. The next challenge would be scale. How to remain inventive while building games larger than anything they had attempted before. By 2011, DICE had grown from a tight Swedish team into a global studio under EA's umbrella. The next chapter of Battlefield needed to be bigger, louder, and technically unmatched. That challenge became Battlefield 3. Released in October 2011, Battlefield 3 marked the full arrival of the Frostbite 2 engine, pushing realism further than ever before. The game featured large-scale multiplayer maps, photorealistic lighting, and destructible environments on a new level, especially on PC, where it became a benchmark for high-end gaming. It was also DICE's first major simultaneous release across PC and consoles for a mainline title, showing how far they had come from their Amiga roots. Frostbite 2 introduced a completely new rendering pipeline, improved destruction physics, and the Ant animation system shared with EA Sports titles, setting new standards for in-house technology. Critics praised Battlefield 3's visuals and sound design, though its single-player campaign received mixed reviews. Still, it was a commercial triumph, selling over 15 million copies and re-establishing Battlefield as a true rival to Call of Duty. Its success also helped secure DICE's reputation within EA as the publisher's premier FPS studio. Behind the scenes, however, the project was grueling. Developers later described long hours and pressure from EA to deliver on ambitious marketing promises. DICE had become a flagship studio, but one that rarely stopped to catch its breath. Then came Battlefield 4, released in October 2013, built on Frostbite 3. It improved the technology once again, with larger maps, dynamic weather, and the now famous Levolution, entire skyscrapers and bridges collapsing mid-match. The spectacle was unmatched, but the launch was rocky, with bugs, crashes, and multiplayer instability drawing criticism. Even so, Battlefield 4 eventually stabilized and went on to enjoy years of active play and community support. Frostbite 3 became the studio's baseline for years afterward, powering every subsequent Battlefield and many EA franchises through the late 2010s. The development crunch surrounding Battlefield 4 pushed the team to its limits. Veterans recalled months of relentless schedules and internal fatigue. Still, DICE's engineers continued to innovate, refining Frostbite into one of the most advanced engines in the industry. The game's post-launch recovery, driven by a massive community test environment program, became a model for transparent developer-player collaboration. By 2015, DICE had diversified its output. That year brought Star Wars Battlefront, a long-awaited reboot of the classic LucasArts series. Built on Frostbite 3, it delivered stunning visuals and authentic Star Wars sound design. Every blaster and TIE fighter rendered with obsessive detail. While praised for its presentation, fans criticized the lack of content at launch, a sign of the increasing tension between creative ambition and publishing demands. Despite mixed reviews, Battlefront sold over 12 million copies in its first year, making it one of DICE's biggest commercial hits to date. Around the same time, Battlefield Hardline, developed primarily by Visceral Games, with support from DICE, experimented with cops and robbers gameplay instead of military combat. It received mixed reviews, highlighting the challenge of keeping Battlefield fresh while meeting annual expectations. The game's lukewarm response reinforced the need for DICE to slow its release cadence and refocus on innovation. Internally, DICE was changing too, with Frostbite now powering nearly every EA franchise. From Need for Speed to Dragon Age Inquisition, DICE's programmers had become the de facto caretakers of the engine. Maintaining a shared platform for multiple studios added new complexity, and many longtime developers began to leave, seeking smaller projects after years of intense schedules. Key technical leaders, including some early Frostbite architects, moved on to new ventures, reflecting growing strain within the studio. By the end of 2015, DICE stood at its commercial peak but creative crossroads. The studio had achieved global recognition, yet behind the glossy trailers and roaring jets, fatigue was setting in. What had begun as a culture of fearless innovation was starting to feel like survival. The success of Battlefield 3 and Battlefront had cemented DICE's place in the industry, but internally the question was shifting: how to sustain creativity when the whole company depended on their technology. By 2016, DICE had weathered a decade of growth, acclaim, and exhaustion. The studio needed to recapture its creative edge, and Battlefield 1 became that chance. Released in October 2016, Battlefield 1 was a bold shift in direction. Set during World War I, an era few shooters had explored. It ran on Frostbite 3, showcasing sweeping deserts, crumbling towns, and chaos on a global scale. Critics praised its art, design, atmosphere, and emotional single-player anthology. For many, it felt like the DICE of old, ambitious, daring, and distinct. The game's development was led by creative director Lars Gustafsson, one of DICE's earliest designers, whose vision helped ground the spectacle in authenticity. Commercially, it was a hit. Battlefield 1 sold over 15 million copies and re-established DICE's reputation for spectacle and scale. That same year marked a quiet turning point for the studio's leadership. Co-founder Marcus Nystrom left in early 2016 to start Fall Damage Studio with other DICE veterans, while longtime general manager Patrick Bach departed later that year to found Resolution Games. Both exits signal the beginning of a generational shift inside DICE, a studio moving from its founder's era into something new. In 2017, DICE launched Star Wars Battlefront 2, a sequel to their 2015 reboot. It was visually stunning, perhaps the most authentic digital Star Wars ever created, but controversy erupted before release. Loot boxes and pay-to-win mechanics dominated headlines, prompting a global backlash that reached even mainstream news. EA quickly revised the system, but the damage was done. The criticism was so intense, it prompted new legal discussions around loot boxes in several countries, with Belgium and the Netherlands moving toward regulation. For the first time, DICE found itself at the center of a public relations storm it hadn't fully created. The team had poured immense passion into recreating Star Wars faithfully, only to see the conversation dominated by monetization. Still, over time, post-launch updates and community support helped rehabilitate the game's image, a slow redemption built on persistence rather than hype. Then came Battlefield 5, released in November 2018. It returned to World War II, but arrived in the shadow of controversy. A trailer featuring a female soldier sparked heated online debate about historical accuracy, and communication missteps only deepened the backlash. Studio leadership, including executive producer Alexander Grendel, later admitted the messaging around inclusivity had been poorly handled, a well-intentioned idea lost in reaction. 2018 also marked another major transition. Patrick Söderlund, a key figure since the Refraction Games merger and one of DICE's longest-serving leaders, left EA that summer to found Embark Studios in Stockholm. bringing several DICE veterans with him. His departure closed a chapter that stretched all the way back to the company's earliest days. At launch, Battlefield 5 struggled with bugs, missing features, and a fragmented release schedule. Critics praised its gunplay and visuals, but noted uneven design and limited content. Over the following years, updates improved the experience, but the damage to DICE's reputation lingered. Many longtime fans questioned whether the studio had lost its direction. The final major update shipped in 2020, effectively closing that chapter of the franchise as the team regrouped for the next generation. Meanwhile, DICE's role within EA continued to evolve. Frostbite had become the engine behind almost every major EA title, from FIFA to Mass Effect, Andromeda, and DICE's programmers were stretched thin supporting external teams. That same centralization that once symbolized DICE's technical brilliance was now limiting its creative flexibility. Developers described an increasing tension between maintaining the shared technology and pursuing original ideas, a struggle that defined much of the late 2010s. Inside the studio, leadership changes began reshaping the company, preparing it for what everyone hoped would be a reset and a return to Battlefield's core identity. Creative director Lars Gustafsson, producer Ryan MacArthur, and others began re-evaluating what made Battlefield unique, signaling the quiet start of a rebuilding era. By 2020, DICE was a paradox, still respected, still capable of brilliance, yet weighed down by its own legacy. The studio had survived controversy, fatigue, and turnover, but stood ready for renewal. What had begun as a culture of fearless innovation was now confronting the challenge of rediscovery. By 2020, over in California, Infinity Ward and Raven Software's Call of Duty roared back with Warzone, a free-to-play, large-scale shooter that took the formula DICE had pioneered and brought it to a new generation. For DICE, these years were both brilliant and brutal. They produced some of their most beautiful, ambitious games and weathered some of their toughest public setbacks. It was a studio at a crossroads, still talented, still proud, but stretched thin and uncertain about what would come next. That answer arrived the following year. In November 2021, DICE released Battlefield 2042, a bold attempt to modernize the series for a new generation. But the launch was troubled. Technical issues, missing features, and controversial design choices drew heavy criticism. The absence of a traditional campaign and the shift toward live service systems left many longtime fans divided. Within weeks, the player base began to drop, and DICE faced one of its most difficult recoveries in years. Over time, the studio persisted. Through major updates, reworked maps, and community-driven changes, Battlefield 2042 gradually found stability. The experience reminded DICE of both its resilience and its limits, a lesson in rebuilding trust one patch at a time. Behind the scenes, a new generation of developers began steering the franchise, preparing for something bigger. That return would take time. 4 years later, Battlefield 6 launched on October 10th, 2025, DICE's largest and most ambitious project in a decade, a full return to modern warfare. Built collaboratively across DICE, Criterion, Ripple Effect, and Motive, it ran on a rebuilt Frostbite engine optimized for performance and scalability. The result was record-breaking. More than 7 million copies sold in the first 3 days, the biggest launch in Battlefield history. Critics called it a return to form, praising its sprawling maps such as Mirak Valley, refined gunplay, strong optimization, and sound design that captured the weight and chaos of combat. But the game was not perfect. Its single-player campaign was seen as short and underdeveloped. Progression felt slow, and the initial map pool leaned more toward infantry fights than full-scale vehicle warfare. Then came the Portal controversy. XP farming servers flooded the mode, and DICE intervened, cutting XP rewards and limiting mastery progress. The fix worked, but not without backlash. As one fan put it, DICE swung a hammer when a scalpel was needed. It became the game's first major post-launch flashpoint, a clash between player freedom and live service balance. Despite the controversy, Battlefield 6 is widely seen as a turning point. It is stable, confident, and unmistakably Battlefield again, chaotic, large-scale, and unscripted. Developers describe its launch as the payoff for 4 years of rebuilding, a studio rediscovering its rhythm. At the time of this video, only the first phase of Season 1, titled Rogue Ops, has been released. The rollout reflects a new rhythm for DICE, one built on steady updates and open communication with players. There are still lingering frustrations, but the difference lies in how DICE handles them, openly, iteratively, and with a confidence born from lessons learned. And just as DICE reclaimed its footing, Activision prepared its next move. Call of Duty Black Ops 7, set during the Gulf War, is scheduled for release on November 14th, 2025, arriving only weeks after Battlefield 6. Once again, the two giants stand face to face. But this time, Battlefield feels ready. By 2025, DICE had grown into one of the most respected studios in the world. It had found balance, focus, and a renewed connection to the spark that first defined it. The faces inside the studio had changed, the technology had evolved, but the spirit, that blend of engineering, precision, and artistic curiosity, remained untouched. The original five remain, not in person but in presence. Andreas Axelsson, Olaf Gustafsson, Fredrik Liljegren, Marcus Nystrom, and Ulf Mandorf. The values you built into its foundation still echo through every game, every project, and every new generation of developers who follow in your footsteps. For the legacy you created and the inspiration you continue to give, we salute you. That enduring vision, that games can be both art and engineering, still defines DICE today. And that is the story of DICE. From 5 students in Sweden to a legacy that changed gaming forever. Before I wrap this up, I'd like to say that in order for me to keep this from becoming a 4-hour or possibly longer video, I haven't covered every game release by DICE. My aim was to highlight only the most important ones for the narrative. Similarly, I wasn't able to mention every single developer contributed to these titles, but a huge thank you to everyone at DICE and EA whose work made this story possible. I hope you enjoyed this story as much as I enjoyed putting it together. If you did, make sure to leave a like, drop a comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories behind the games and studios that shaped the video gaming industry. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.